Hi everybody, and thanks very much for staying to let me tell you about the Teaching Commission. Just a bit about myself. You may know I was with Kevin Courtney, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and now I'm in the House of Lords as a Labour Life peer. So I can't really see you because the oh yeah, I can see you now because it's got very dark, but it's really great to be here. So since about September last year, I've been chairing the Teaching Commission, which is made up of 16 commissioners. They are key policymakers like Natalie Pereira from the Education Policy Institute, Dame Christine Gilbert, who was the ex-Chief Inspector, Dame Alison Peacock from the Chartered College of Teaching, but also, crucially, the Commission is made up of practising also teachers and leaders. So in that famous saying, nothing about us without us, we have really rich discussions. We've had 8 meetings. The meetings consist of commissioners talking to one another, and then we have expert witness sessions. So we've had 16 expert witnesses talking to us about teaching. People like Professor Jack Worth from the National Foundation for Educational Research, who is really on top of all the data around teacher supply. Professor Becky Taylor, who leads for the DFE, the Teachers Working Lives Survey. So we've had really key witnesses giving evidence to the Commission, and the Commission will be launch the website in which all the data and all the findings will be launched on the 4th of July, where the Commission is launched at the Wellington Festival of Education. So what is the Commission doing? What has it actually done? So it seeks to answer a question: why are so many teachers leaving the profession, and what can we do about it? Because you will know that there is at the moment, and there has been for some time, a teacher supply crisis. And that's consisted of two issues. One is recruitment and one is retention. So this slide tells it all really. In 2024, just half teacher trainees were recruited against the DFE targets. Those targets have only been met once in the last 11 years, and that was in COVID. And the number of teacher vacancies has doubled since before the pandemic. And that's particularly acute for schools in deprived areas where the struggle to recruit and to retain teachers is particularly acute. And I'll be saying a little more about that in this talk. What we're finding is that England has one of the largest class sizes in the developed world. We're up there with Mexico and Uruguay and Brazil when it comes to the number of pupils we have in each class. And that is influenced by funding, absolutely, but it's also influenced by teacher supply, because the number of teacher vacancies has doubled since before the pandemic. And again, those vacancies are particularly acute, particularly present in deprived areas. Now, recruitment is a challenge. The government has said that recruitment is improving and it's dropped its recruitment targets. I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But for the profession, for the Commission, one of the things which has become most clear, most apparent, is that the key issue is retention, teacher retention. 10% of teachers left the profession before retirement age in 2022. 1 in 4 teachers leave within 3 years, and a third leave within 5 years. And people from ethnic minority backgrounds are underrepresented in teaching. They're disproportionately failed to get a place on a tech training course, and they're disproportionately unrepresented in promoting posts. Now then, that rate of exodus from the profession, 1 in 4 leaving within 3 and a third leaving within 5, means that we have what Anna McShane calls a weakened workforce. We have a very inexperienced workforce. England has one of the most inexperienced teacher workforces in the OECD. And more inexperienced teachers disproportionately teach in the most challenging schools. But their shock on entering the profession, this thing called career shock, is compounded by the fact that so many teachers who've done 8 or 9 or 7 years experience and have just gained the experience where they can be supportive and they can help more inexperienced colleagues cope with the shock of entering the profession, the workload that is entailed, and help them understand what's important and what can be left. They leave the profession. That means the supply line up through middle management to leadership is drying up. It means that more and more teachers earlier and earlier in their careers get promoted, and the problem with that is that in too many cases, they don't have the experience to be able to cope with all the demands of the promoted post, and they leave too. So a weakened workforce really affects the whole of the teaching profession. And why does this matter? Well, it matters in particular because if the quality of our education system, the quality of pupils' learning is absolutely linked, inexorably linked to the quality of the teaching that they receive. And again, this is particularly the case for the most deprived pupils. So, let's just talk about pay. Teachers do care about pay. The NFER says that teachers need an average rise of 3.1% to stop their pay falling further behind average graduate pay, and a further 1.8% to compensate for the lack of opportunity to work flexibly. So teachers do care about pay, but the witnesses to the Commission and the teachers on the Commission talking to us, we've got 4 practising teachers, told us that the concern about pay is very particular, and it's particularly concerning that teachers are acutely aware of how hard they work. They're acutely aware of the hours they work and the intensity at pace in which they work. So teachers top the TUC survey for the 12th year for the amount of unpaid overtime they do. And if you look at the averages for teachers' working hours, primary teachers work for just over 24 hours a week in the classroom. That's their timetabled time in the classroom. For secondary teachers, it's 20.5 hours. But then they more than double these working hours outside the classroom. So primary teachers do nearly 32 hours work outside the classroom, secondary teachers 33 hours. These are the largest, these are the biggest, the most amount of work outside the classroom in the OECD. In other words, our teachers, the time they spend teaching is about an average for the OECD. The time they spend outside the classroom is a real outlier in the OECD. And the question we have to ask is, why is this? Why are our teachers spending so much time outside their actual teaching hours doing work related to their practice, but not actually teaching? Just to finally say, I just want to say that, you know, we're acutely aware also about the legacy of the decline in funding to education. So declined in real terms by 12% between 2012 and 2020. And we're acutely aware that there are real funding pressures now. But the funding of education doesn't appear to us to be consistent with a long-term strategy for education. In the last 2010 to 2017, health spending increased in real terms by 40%, education spending increased in real terms by 3%. And Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies said, this doesn't look like a spending pattern which is really investing in growth. So education constantly is the poor relation to health in spending. That has real effects on what schools can do in the employment and the retention of teachers. So the government has said it's reduced its ITT targets by 40% this year, but one of the things which became really apparent in the Commission sessions was that even the targets, even if the government says we're going to meet the targets and we can reduce them, those targets are built on very shaky foundations because they assume that the current situation with teacher supply is sufficient on which to calculate the targets. So the current targets for initial teacher training assume that the current teacher workforce is fit for purpose. It clearly isn't. 45% of schools use non-specialist teachers for maths. By non-specialist, it means they don't have a post-A-level qualification. 40% of schools for physics, 17% for modern foreign languages. So when the government targets are set for these subjects, they do not account for the routine use of non-specialist teachers who may well do a very, very good job, but whose subject knowledge, one would assume, is less strong than teachers who have a degree in these subjects. What these targets also don't take account of is, I was talking to, as a witness to the Commission, a Deputy Head of Science who had 4 teachers without science degrees in the department, and the huge amount of extra work that was on her shoulders in terms of lesson planning, supporting those teachers, supporting assessment, is in effect, she was quadrupling her work as a science teacher. So there are real strains on the system because the way of calculating teacher supply is based on the current situation being okay, with vast amounts of lessons being taught by teachers who do not have a degree qualification in the subject that they're teaching. And this is particularly the case for disadvantaged schools. Now, this was the slide that really, really shocked the commissioners. So the government says, and I agree, that secure subject knowledge helps teachers to motivate pupils and to teach effectively, and teaching quality is a crucial factor in raising pupil attainment. But just look at this slide. This is a slide that's from the government's evidence to the School Teachers Review Body, and it shows that disadvantaged schools struggle more with retaining teachers and experiencing shortages. So schools with the highest pupil premium, at the highest percentage of pupil premium pupils, have the highest leaving rate, over 11% of teachers leaving each year, the highest turnover rate, nearly 13%, the highest percentage of unqualified teachers, and the highest hours taught by non-specialists. And really, there's only one conclusion that you come to here, which is that disadvantaged schools, with the children who most need the most experienced and most qualified teachers, in order to compensate for the already very difficult start in life that they have, they are most unlikely to get those teachers. For the Commission, this was a devastating slide. It shows that inequalities in children's lives, and particularly for the lives of the most poorest and most needy children, those are compounded through our school system, through the distribution of teachers. They are the least likely to get the teachers they need. So teacher supply is not just a nice to have. It's not just something that, as a General Secretary of 2 education unions, I would fight for. Teacher supply, and adequate teacher supply, is absolutely a social justice issue. It is absolutely an issue for the poorest in our society. So, why are teachers leaving in the numbers that they're doing? Well, evidence from the Teachers Working Lives survey, which is a survey run by the government, and it's done with, it's a phase 3, a big sample, ask teachers and leaders about their working lives. Teachers' working hours are going down, but very slowly, very marginal decreases in their working hours. So, for example, in teachers in 2023 worked 48.8 hours a week. Sorry, that's 2022. And in 2024, 48.7. That gives you an idea about how slow the reduction in their working hours is. Pupil behaviour is really rising in importance, particularly the time spent dealing with it. And shifting behaviour from significantly disrupts most lessons to rarely a serious problem is equivalent to teachers of a 40% pay rise. That was done by a swap survey. What would you swap? What would you swap? So pupil behaviour is really important. The interesting thing is that 76% of school teachers can say that behaviour in their school is good or very good, school leaders, compared with 43% of teachers. So there is a definite disjuncture between leaders' views of pupil behaviour and teachers' views of pupil behaviour. And what came through really clearly in the latest survey is teachers are saying they're spending too long dealing with behaviour incidents, that the behaviour policies of their school are not consistently applied, and that senior leaders don't deal with behaviour effectively enough. And leaders believe that they do, and teachers believe that they don't. Now, perhaps it was ever thus, but these findings should make us think, what is it that we can do to do things differently? Stress and poor well-being and high workload were reported as the main reasons for leaving the state sector. So 90% of teachers said the main reasons they would think of leaving the state sector was stress and poor well-being and high workload. 78% of teachers said, of those who answered in this big survey, said that the job didn't leave enough time for their personal life. 62 said that it affected their mental health negatively, and 49% said it affected their physical health badly. Actually, though, teachers are more satisfied with classroom teaching, 60% satisfied most of the time, than with their job generally, where 45% are satisfied most of the time. And only 35% of teachers agreed with the statement, "My school recognises and rewards high performance from the teaching and leadership staff." Now, you might think that's low, but I would wonder if you want to guess how many think the government values teachers. 5%. So, but this is the slide that really shocked the commissioners. So, this was teachers who had left the profession, that's the all leavers slide, and then teachers and leaders in 2024. Those who had left the profession, 79% said had an acceptable workload. Only 22% of teachers and leaders said they had an acceptable workload. 75% of teachers and leaders who have left said that they had sufficient control over their workload. Only 34% of teachers and leaders said that they had sufficient control. Sufficient control of your workload is a really important concept. It relates really strongly to the concept of professional agency, the ability to make informed choices about how to conduct your work based on your professional skills and understanding. And England comes, in the international league tables, England comes very low with teachers reporting professional agency. Teachers do not feel they have sufficient control over the work they do, the way they do it, and do not feel that their expertise is either listened to or used in whole school decisions. That's a particular finding for the English education system. So, is it all gloom and doom? No, it's not. It's not hopeless, because the Commission obviously has to establish the scale of the problem, but then we ask the question, where should we go from here? And so the Commission's developing recommendations in two areas. Recommendations for government to create the system conditions in which teachers can thrive and stay in the profession, and recommendations for leadership teams in schools to create the conditions in which teachers thrive and can stay in the profession. For the government, there will be recommendations on initial teacher training policy. In particular, how can schools be incentivised to engage in initial teacher training, because at the moment there are disincentives to do that. Support for early career teachers, listening to witnesses. There's a mixed bag with the early career framework. Quite a lot saying it's provided structure and it's provided useful professional development, but a lot also saying it's too rigid, there's too much repetition from the ITT, from initial teacher training, it doesn't take school context into account, and actually what I need to learn about at this stage is special educational needs, or I need as an English teacher to learn about resilience in extended writing, or something else. There's not enough personalisation in the early career framework. So we'll be making recommendations around that. Then support for mid-career teachers. Now here, the Key has really helped, and Arbor, they've done they're using new data. They've looked at what happens to mothers, teachers, largely in their 30s, who become mothers. What do they do when they return to work? And this report, which we published after the half term, will show, and I hope they don't mind me giving some of this away, that it's easier to get part-time work for women with children is really important. It's easier to get it in primary than in secondary. And the reason for refusing it is leaders saying, I want consistency with that class. The problem is, by making that requirement consistency, you're likely to lose that teacher. Whereas if you can have two teachers working part-time, you're likely to be able to keep those teachers and keep them in the profession. There's also a whole other issue around flexible working, and the Commission will be making very concrete proposals around flexible working. We believe the concept needs to be better understood in the profession. It means a lot of different things. Flexible working is not just one thing. It's not just part-time working. It could be staggered starts. It could be 1 day or 2 days which teachers can bank where they can book in time to do something important like attend the nativity play or attend a doctor's appointment, or just have some of that flexibility which everybody else has. And there are support you can get through Arbor for using that to timetable into teachers' working lives. But 46% of graduates have the opportunity to work flexibly. Only 2% of teachers are even bothered to apply. And whilst there's this perception of inflexibility, when the contrast is so many other graduate professions do have flexibility, that makes retention in teaching, particularly for teachers returning with children, much more difficult. Now, as I said at the beginning, we need these teachers with 10, 12, 15 years experience, because they have so much experience, not just in teaching, but also in coping with the demands of the profession. And they can be of such support to beginning teachers. If they're not there, beginning teachers get promoted too quickly, and they don't get that professional comradeship and support which they so need. We're going to be really supporting the government and schools in thinking about flexible working, paying teachers properly, reform of school funding, reform of leadership qualifications. This is a really key finding. None of the national professional qualifications for leadership have anything to say about how do you manage your team and how do you lead people. They're all focused on pedagogy. Well, one of your most important jobs as a school leader is to lead teams and lead people. People aren't actually that easy to manage. They might be very goodwill, they might be very hardworking, but people are individuals, and you need to know how to enthuse, how to accommodate, how to lead, how to manage difficult situations. This absolutely should be a key thread of national professional qualifications, so that will be a major recommendation. And one of the other key things, we've heard an awful lot in the Commission about child poverty and the effect that has on schools and on teachers, who actually are usually the first people, and support staff, the first people to come across the damage, distress and dysfunction caused by child poverty. And we are looking at in what ways does the support system need to be built around the school? Now, the government is doing that, more mental health support in schools, but actually, unless we reduce the incidence of child poverty in this country, we are going to continue to place schools and teachers and leaders and support staff under an intolerable burden, as parents can't get mental health support, they can't get a doctor's appointment, they can't see a social worker, the child is seeing their 11th social worker that year. The schools are going to continue to be under that burden of providing the support which they are neither funded for nor properly trained for. So we really have to look at that. And one key thing is maternity pay. Teachers' maternity pay is half the maternity pay of civil servants in the Department for Education. And the amount of weeks that they get is half the weeks for the Department for Education. Now, if the Department for Education and the civil servants can have maternity leave in terms of weeks, which is double that of teachers, we have to ask why teacher maternity pay is so poor in comparison with other professions and other parts of the public service. So one of the key recommendations will be around that. And then we have recommendations to schools. Throughout the Commission meetings, the key thing which came back again and again and again was that we do not want to be treated like children in school. We are adult people doing a very professional job. So those schools and those MATs which can promote teacher voice and professional agency, no, I'm not saying professional autonomy, professional agency, treating teachers as valued professionals, those are the MATs which will retain their teachers. Teacher choice, particularly over their professional development, is absolutely key. It's absolutely central. We've heard from too many focus groups, teachers saying that too much professional development is generic and is not meeting my individual needs. That should be the basis of the professional development conversations in school. And teachers should have a voice in the policies which they have to enact. So, discipline policies, behaviour policies, absence policies, special educational needs policies, safeguarding policies, all those policies which teachers actually have to enact every day in their working lives, They should be the source of debate and discussion in the school. They should not be handed down from high. Teachers need a voice in how they enact their careers, how they enact their professionalism. We're going to be looking at the use of anonymous surveys to gauge teacher feedback on the quality of their working lives. This is something that I did every year as the General Secretary of a large organisation, the National Education Union. Every year we had an anonymised staff survey. The results used to drive me mad because people would wanted the impossible and got irate about things which they hadn't got the right end of the stick for. But I would look at them first and then I would leave them. I'd go back a week later and look at them again. And things which I had no idea about, like how dysfunctional IT was in the union, because if I had an IT problem, I got it solved within 5 minutes. Of course I did. But people having to put chits in and wait for weeks, to get their laptop fixed. So I wouldn't have known that without anonymised staff surveys, and lots of other things I wouldn't have known about. Some of them very serious. So really, the use of anonymised school surveys to really work out what your staff are feeling is, I think, really important. Policy guidance and support for leaders about best practice to support teachers at different stages of their career. And we're going to be recommending actions for government, but actions for MATs as well. The practice of taking professional people management really seriously. Your most valuable resource is your teachers. They are your most valuable resource because good teachers enable children to succeed. They lift up the work of the school, and they are remembered forever by the pupils, particularly the pupils who don't get positive role models of adults at home. So your most valuable resource in a school are your teachers. And how is it that we can treat them better so they work less intensively, they work less exhaustively, they can focus on the things which are most important. We stop them doing busy work, which is done for largely in-school accountability purposes in case the inspector calls, and we value teachers' time, we value their professionalism, we value their knowledge, and we value their contribution. If we're going to really do that, we have to start thinking about teacher work quality, not work quantity. I want the government to carry on measuring hours, but also start measuring work quality. We'll be having case study models of effective flexible working to see what can be achieved in different situations, and support for leaders on effective behaviour policies. So as I said, the Commission will report in July at the Festival of Education. It's web-based, and we're going to be putting out, it will also be distributed and promoted through Arbor, so you'll have a fantastic resource there of analysis, recommendations, case studies and evidence, and we've deliberately done it web-based so you get easy access. You can go in quickly, you don't have to read it all, you can go to the bit which is going to be most useful to you and get good ideas for really trying to stem the exodus of teachers leaving the profession, retaining the teachers, developing them and allowing them to do the job for your pupils. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. We've had a lot of good questions coming through, and I don't think the QR code's up there anymore, but hopefully you took the snap. So I'm just going to fire a few at you now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The kind of top-rated question was, what consideration has been given to the equally challenging issue of recruiting and retaining support staff in schools?
Yeah. So this was a big question I wrestled with for a long time, but we've had 8 meetings, and it's been quite hard work getting the Commission off the ground. And I thought, if I spread too widely, I'm not going to have good findings. I'm not going to. So we may well, because the Commission will be carrying on, that may be the source of a further commission. But I thought at the beginning, we just really have to focus on teachers and do that job as well as we can. And then as we continue with the Commission next year, we'll be thinking of new areas. So support staff may well come up.
That sounds great. Thank you very much. You talked about teacher recruitment being hardest in disadvantaged schools. Can you talk a bit more about what factors contribute to that, and then what you think we could do to address that specific problem? Yeah,
I think there's quite a lot of evidence about disadvantaged schools. So they're often in parts of the country where it's more difficult to get graduates to move to, because they're often in deprived areas of the country where the cultural institutions and quality of life isn't clearly as there as much for teachers. And then they're much harder to teach in. So teachers in those schools have to encounter the daily reality of child poverty, all the distress that brings, all the challenges that brings into the school, and on top of that, they have to cope with an accountability regime which has been very poor. Indeed, a previous chief inspector said, well, we're not there to look at context, we're there just to look at the quality of education. And actually they did that very badly. So the Education Policy Institute in 2016 did a report on grammar schools, looking at grammar schools, but as an incidence they found out that schools in the most deprived areas, which on a robust value-added measure of improved performance, were disproportionately likely to be judged in special measures or to fail the Ofsted inspection completely, whereas teachers in the schools in the leafy suburbs, where it made the same decline in value-added, were disproportionately likely to be rated good or outstanding. So, and the conclusion that Education Policy Institute came into is that Ofsted was better at inspecting the quality of a school's intake than the quality of education provided. I think that's a justified critique. I know that Ofsted is now trying to look at context. I'll be very interested to see how they do that and how they do that validly, reliably and fairly.
Interesting, thank you. And we sort of touched a little bit on staff pay, which is a hot topic at the moment. Yeah. How do you think staff should be rewarded in schools, and what do you think in terms of the proportion that the government should fund of that?
Well, I think it's very difficult for schools. I mean, if we're looking at a 4% pay rise to school, which is the number that's out there, and schools have been and schools have budgeted for 1.8%, I think it's very, very difficult, given the funding levels at the moment, to see how they're going to be able to cope with that. And I'm sure that is a conversation that's going on in government at the moment, in conjunction with the national insurance rises for staff, so it's more it's more expensive to employ. And then if you've got an unfunded pay rise, given the history of school funding and given the fact that, I mean, this government did put in an extra £2.1 billion when it was elected, but I think after you've had 14 years of inadequate funding, that carries a long drag with it. So I think that would be very difficult.
And then just a kind of a follow-on question from that. We talked about flexible working, we talked about maternity. How do you see that, if that's layered on as an additional benefit, which again would be having to be funded? How do you see that being paid for, and where do you think the compromises need to be made?
So it's really interesting today because I was in the talk on the other stage. I was in the audience, 3 MAT leaders talking about the MAT of the future, and talking eventually about flexible working, and saying there are costs, definitely. But when you consider the costs of advertising for teachers when they leave, hiring them, the cost of supply cover, I think one of the conclusions we've come to in the Commission is there are recommendations for government, but I don't think we can, as a sector, just sit back and say, until all these things are done by the government, we're going to stay with employment practices which were okay for the 20th century, but not for the 21st. We have to demonstrate that we can change things ourselves. And slowly, schools are doing that. I do think this notion of consistency really has to be looked at. I was talking recently to a teacher in her 30s, physics teacher in one of the most deprived schools in Portsmouth. She's got 2 young children, one of whom was having a really difficult time in nursery. She asked her school, could she not do registration 2 mornings a week so she could just go to nursery and settle her youngest child down. That was refused. She's left the profession. She was the only physics teacher in the school. Now, that doesn't seem to me to be like a good decision and or a good outcome or sensible.
I think I'm spot on. And I think the link to that question, I think on things that people in this room can do, just kind of changing how schools are structured. You mentioned timetabling and flexible working. Has the Commission considered things like 4-day weeks, longer terms, extended breaks? How should people be thinking about this?
I think we haven't gone into exactly how people should do it, because that would be a complete waste of time. What the Commission's recommendations will be these are the things you need to think about. And there'll also be case studies to show that it's possible to do this. Not exactly like it's done in the case study, because school contexts are different, but what the recommendations are about, broad principles outlined by case studies which show what can be done, but also quite a challenge to say, we can't just keep saying no to these things. So how schools do it will be different. How schools do flexible working is different. So you've got some are looking at a 9-day fortnight, but you've got others who got this time bank. Teachers got a day a year which they can time bank, which is what they want. I think the key thing there also is to have those open conversations. So rather than just waiting for teachers to come and ask for flexible working, we interviewed one, she's a flexible working champion, who asks twice a year so that those things can be planned then into the timetable, so it's known in advance. And so it's about that conversation, isn't it? It's about not assuming that you know what your staff want. It's about asking the questions. It's about that professional dialogue. We need a lot more of that in schools.
Quite agree. And we'll try, from our perspective, to give you the tools to make the right decisions in your context and how you want to timetable that.
Timetabler, that's the...
Timetabler is one.
Timetabler, yeah. Staggered work times and... two afternoons a term off. How you can timetable helps you how you can plan those into the timetable.
Yeah. I think from our perspective, we know it's possible, and I think there's often a perception that it's not possible, and we can show and prove that it is possible. How it works is very individual.
I don't think we can say any longer it's not possible. Women make up 76% of the teaching profession, and do you know, this seems to be forgotten, women have children. In their 30s now, usually. Now, either we make teaching a job which it's perfectly possible to do with children, and we're a long way from that yet, or we have to take flexible working, which for women in their 30s with children often means part-time. We have to make that possible. If we don't, we lose those teachers. Surely we want to keep them in the profession in ways in which they can contribute to raise standards in our schools, to teach the children in our schools well. So it's just not possible any longer to say no. The computer says no. We have to find ways of the computer saying, yes, that's possible. Now, that may well be a discussion. People may want something they can't get, and there may be very good reasons for that. When I did the staff survey, there were often people wanted things I couldn't give them. But that was the basis of then a discussion about why. Not they were anonymised, but when I met the whole staff after a staff survey, talking with them about, several of you said you wanted this. I can't do this because, but I'll tell you what I can do. I can do this. It's about, if you treat the teachers professionally and well, they will look after the pupils. And it's not about the provider interest, this is about the consumer interest.
Totally agree. All right, well, on that note, I think we'll end there. And I just want to give a final round of applause and a huge thanks to Baroness Mary Bousted.